What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is Legitical Response. We cover political news. We keep you up to date and keep you informed with everything that the government does. I'm finally back. We back in the studio, back from vacation, back from that fiasco of all the cancellations of flights, man. What the hell is the deal with that? They got my name wrong on the damn ticket, and I had to go back and forth. I almost didn't make it back, y'all. I almost got stuck in freaking Tampa because they printed my middle name where my first name is supposed to go, and then I went back to get a reprint of the ticket, and they said, well, no, that's how it appears on your driver's license. Misreading my driver's license, I had to point out to them, blah blah blah, and then show them another form of ID, and it took forever, and I almost missed the flight. Like, literally, when I got back, because you had to take a freaking tram way over here to go get your ticket redone, took me forever to get back, and literally, like, I got all through TSA and all that BS and literally had to run to the gate. And as soon as I got there, I was the last person to make it. But I made it, y'all, and I'm back. Didn't get back till late last night, but that's not what we're talking about. And I've rambled on for too long about my personal life. But we had our Fauci hearing today, and it was informative, if you will. I still think that... we're no closer to finding out exactly where the pandemic started, where it came from, who's to blame for it, although we can point a lot of fingers to China. And I still believe in the lab leak theory, even though they are still trying to put up the conspiracy theory that it jumped from a bat to a penguin to a goat and then into a wet market in Wuhan instead of the damn virology lab that actually studies this very virus. Yes, I don't know why they are still trying to push that theory that it's natural, even though we have all this evidence to state otherwise. But we're still no closer to finding out because, for some reason, the Chinese government is trying to block anybody and everybody from investigating this thing. Like, why? Right? If it was just a naturally occurring virus that just came out of nowhere and just all of a sudden jumped to humans, don't you think the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, Xi Jinping, would be completely fine with letting people investigate this for themselves? However, if it did spill out from a lab leak, that would be very embarrassing for the CCP. And, I could see how they would want to try to cover that up, which is, just so happens to be exactly what has been happening. If everything is natural, like I said, why would they want to stop investigators from investigating that? Makes no sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Let me know down in the comments section what you think it is, to be honest with you, because all logical signs point to it being leaked from a lab, whether on purpose or on accident. We don't know. Some people believe it was purposefully, but that would be into the detriment of the Chinese Communist Party because it hit China harder than anybody, I do believe. So that I think it's more of a slip up, an accident, a oopsie, if you will. But we had another Dr. Fauci hearing, and he's no longer in government, and now he can be absolutely prosecuted for lying to Congress, and I hope they do because, he sure did beat around the bush a lot. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I happen to think she says some stuff that she probably shouldn't say. However, I watched this entire hearing, right? I had to sit through this thing, but I watched this entire hearing, and I watched as every single Democrat went on this endless of sucking up to Dr. Fauci. It was disgusting, in my opinion, just the amount of sucking up they did. And then we get to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Right? And she just pretty much does the same thing, just in the opposite direction. And the Democrats went absolutely nuts. They just went completely crazy, right? Because she refused to call Dr. Fauci Dr. Fauci. She was calling him Mr. Fauci. But she brings up some pretty good points. Check this out.
Mr. Fauci, you were quoted on CBS Face the Nation saying it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci?
I am a scientist who uses the scientific method to gain information.
Yes, you said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes
Again,
or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no
Yes,
answer.
it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we'll take that as a you don't know what you represent.
Oh,
But this, as director of the NIH, you did sign off on these so-called scientific experiments. And as a dog lover, I want to tell you this is disgusting and evil, what you signed off on, and these experiments that happened to beagles paid for by the American taxpayer. And I want you to know Americans don't pay their taxes for animals to be tortured like this. So the type of science that you are representing, Mr. Fauci, is abhorrent and it needs to stop. Mr. Fauci, you also represent the type of science that where you confess that you made up the COVID rules, including
I didn't hear what you
6
said.
feet social distancing and masking of children.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it up. You
I
made it
didn't
up as
say
you went.
I made it up.
So are you saying this is fake news, Mr. Fauci?
I didn't say I made anything up.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared.
This was a time in history where you got to throw out the first pitch at the Washington Nationals baseball game while Americans were forced to stay home and watch such events that they love from at home alone on their televisions. And what a hypocrisy this picture shows. Here you are without your mask, with empty seats everywhere. Remember the cardboard cutout fans? That was one of the most insulting things to Americans, having to watch the games from home where you got to go and enjoy the game and sit right next to people, not following the 6 feet of distancing, not wearing your mask, and everyone else was forced to stay home and stop enjoying life. And your science here, your science is displayed perfectly in this picture where children in school were put in plastic bubbles because of your science, your repulsive, evil science. And let's go back to your very own email. You said earlier you don't use email. Oh, you do. Right here. This is your own email where you said the typical mask you buy in the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus. I do not recommend that you wear a mask. This is your email. This is your own words. But yet children all over America were forced to wear masks. Healthy children forced to wear masks, muzzled in their schools. And then they were forced to learn from home because of your so-called science and your medical suggestions while you and all your cronies get paid from Big Pharma. You know that what this committee should be doing? We should be recommending you to be prosecuted. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci.
Mr. Chairman, I have a...
You know, it's funny. Oh, I didn't make it up. It just came out of nowhere. It's not scientific. Well, why the hell did they push this so damn hard, right? Like, I know that wasn't the NIH or whatever. It was the CDC. But why didn't Dr. Fauci tell these people and come out publicly and say, hey, there's no scientific basis for this 6-foot social distancing thing. Why are y'all doing this? And it just came out of nowhere, right? Somebody made it up. I wonder who that would be. We don't know. We don't know who made it up. But why the hell were they so strict in forcing people to follow this thing if there's no scientific basis for it and somebody just made it up? Right? Like, we want answers to these questions, and Dr. Fauci dodging those questions doesn't help anything at all. And with the old hypocrisy thing, a lot of government officials done this. This is something that I always say there's a silver lining to everything, right? And COVID showed us a bunch. Everything from what was going on in our schools to the absolute hypocrisy of some of our government officials by forcing the people to wear masks and do all this. We had to stay in our homes and all that bullshit. Of course, I didn't, but, you know, a lot of businesses were closed, so it didn't really matter if you went anywhere, but a lot of places were, like, on strict lockdown, and they were forcing these rules, implementing these rules that a lot of them didn't have any scientific basis behind them, and then they get out in public and do the complete opposite. You know, that makes our trust in the government just diminish to an insane degree. Like, huh? You're forcing us to do something that you're not even abiding by. And then they don't expect the people to get mad. They don't expect Congress to come after these people. And as far as Congress, they're not doing nearly enough, in my opinion. They didn't push Fauci enough. A couple of them did. A couple of them did a pretty good job. Check this out.
Dr. Fauci, I have to say, I, as so many Americans, am deeply disappointed in your actions during a critical time in our nation's history while you were in key leadership roles as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and as the chief medical advisor to President Biden. Put quite simply, you failed miserably, in my opinion. Based on all we have learned during the pandemic and all that we have since learned through this committee's work, I believe your failures stem from both an effort of self-preservation manifested by a series of lies and cover-up, and by a total failure of leadership. It was obvious to everyone that you and your organization, NIH, had a lot to lose if the American people were to discover that COVID-19 was most likely leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China, and that you, via EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak, actually funded this research, and that this lab was actively and recklessly conducting gain-of-function research. As such, you did everything in your power to deflect and cover up this possibility. You even recruited others to help you in this effort. Unfortunately, this cost our country and the world valuable time that may have led to answers regarding the origin, may have blunted the spread, and would have almost certainly saved lives. While I think most of us have known all along what I just described, what I have been appalled to discover through sworn testimony to this committee is the level at which you and those that worked for you went to cover up the obvious. Just a few examples, and I know these have been touched on, but they're important for everyone to hear. Dr. Lawrence Tabak, former acting director of NIH, testified that under the generic definition that NIH did in fact fund gain-of-function research. This was based on a definition that was initially used by NIH and a definition that was abandoned and removed from the website in October of 2021 and replaced by a new, much more detailed definition with a much higher bar that you have since conveniently used to define gain-of-function testing and to deny what Dr. Tabak has since confirmed. He also said that EcoHealth Alliance failed to properly and promptly report that their research violated the terms of the grant, something that went completely unaddressed under your watch. Dr. Morans, your senior advisor, who you have tried today to distance yourself from, but whose large volume of emails clearly demonstrate that you had a very close and personal relationship with, and who reported to you directly, has openly bragged about how he subverted FOIA requests. I remind you that the law requires you and your former organization to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests. It is not optional. If you or your employees or your organization that you oversaw were systemically avoiding transparency and illegally hiding or destroying documents that rightfully belong to the American people, then you should be criminally charged, and they should as well. In addition, Dr. Gregory Folkers, your chief of staff, also engaged in illegal practices in which he crafted messages using symbols instead of letters to avoid FOIA exposure. In an email, April 2020, from Dr. Morans to Peter Daszak, he says, quote, "There are things I can't say." Well, I wonder what he couldn't say. He also went on to say, quote, "Except Tony is aware, and I have learned there are ongoing efforts within NIH to steer through this with minimal damage to you, Peter, and colleagues, and to NIH and NAID," end quote. And then a few days later, he said, quote, "I have reason to believe that there are already efforts going on to protect you," end quote. In February of 2021, Dr. Morans wrote to us saying, quote, "I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I'm FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe," end quote. Dr. Fauci, I want to know what you were being protected from and what you needed to be safe from. I'm going to go on because I have a little time here. He went on to say, quote, "Plus, I deleted most of the earlier emails after sending to Gmail. Once again, illegal and an actual crime." Dr. Morans noted in another email to Dr. Kirsch saying, quote, I learned the tricks last year from an old friend, Marge Moore, who heads our FOIA office and also hates FOIAs," end quote. It is absolutely amazing to me that Dr. Morans and Marge Moore still have jobs and our taxpayers are still paying their salaries. Dr. Morans wrote to Dr. Daszak in April of 2021, quote, P.S. I forgot to say there is no worry about FOIAs. I can either send stuff to Tony on his private email or hand it to him to work or at his house. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble. End quote. Apparently, you neglected to surround yourself with equally smart individuals. Dr. Morans wrote to another collaborator, Peter Hotitz, in June 2021 at Baylor College of Medicine that he had deleted all his emails related to COVID origin when, quote, the shit hit the fan, end quote. He said, quote, I feel pretty sure Tony were too. The best way to avoid FOIA hassles is to delete all emails when you learn the subject is pretty sensitive. In October 2021, Dr. Morans wrote to Peter Daszak, quote, Peter, from Tony's numerous recent comments to me and from what Francis has been vocal about over the past 5 years, we are trying to protect you. And they are protecting their own reputations as well, end quote.
So essentially, they changed the definition of gain-of-function research so Dr. Fauci could get out from underneath actually being charged with some sort of crime over funding the gain-of-function research that they were funding. This all is just corruption at its greatest level, in my opinion. How are you going to change the definition of gain-of-function research? Because otherwise, he would have been lying to Congress when they said there was no gain-of-function research. We didn't fund any of that when they outright did. And then we learned from a lot of digging on behalf of Congress and their congressional investigators that, yeah, they were trying to subvert the Freedom of Information Act. They were doing all kinds of stuff to try to get out from underneath having to give that information up to congressional investigators, defying oversight. Once again, this is something that I talk about all the time. The Biden administration just doesn't care about oversight, right? And Dr. Fauci tries to get out from underneath this one by saying, oh, it was them and it was abhorrent behavior and they shouldn't have been doing that. Well, I'm sorry, dude. That was your top advisor. I don't care if you didn't know about it. You should know about it. I find it hard to believe that he didn't know about that, right? Like, this is his top guy. This is the guy that he goes to, right? He says, oh, he wasn't actually advising me. That's what he tries to say in this to try to get out from underneath it. He wasn't actually advising me, but he was his top advisor. Yeah, nice. Good job there, Dr. Fauci, getting out from underneath some responsibility, getting out from underneath being charged for lying to the American people on a constant basis, because we know through witness testimony, whistleblower testimony, that he lied. There was all these emails. They purposefully tried to cover up the lab leak theory when they damn well know that was the most likely outcome of where this thing came from. And then, not only that, but I'm sure we all remember the government censorship, right? We've talked about this at great length, and I talk about it all the time. The White House, the FBI, and all these places, and the NIH, they all had backdoor access to these social media companies. They were pressuring these people to take these posts down and ban these people outright on a litany of different subjects. COVID-19 was a major one. This is one of the most egregious violations of our First Amendment rights that any governmental body can affect to the American people, if you will, right? Like, this just goes above and beyond corruption, in my opinion. And the fact that they were doing this to medical experts blows my mind. Check this out.
It's been insinuated that politicians, only bloggers, only conspiracy theorists are disagreeing with you. I want to point out that I'm probably the only member of Congress that actually treated patients during the pandemic from the very beginning to the very end of the pandemic, during night shifts in the ER. Thousands of patients during that time. And in 2020, I was censored. My medical license was threatened because I disagreed with bureaucrats. Literally taken off the internet as a person who is treating patients with leading edge technologies, developing theories, but doing my very best, but being censored by the United States government for the first time, stepping in and taking the place of medical professionals as the experts in healthcare. Any dissent surrounding COVID-19 treatments, mask mandates, and any public policy surrounding the pandemic was immediately labeled as anti-science. I watched as public health officials and politicians told my patients what treatment options were best for them, regardless of their comorbidities or their medical history. Despite my education and my training and my experience, my opinions were relegated to conspiracy and misinformation by so-called healthcare experts. And what's funny is everything I was censored on, I was proven to be right. Pretty crazy, isn't it?
So that, in my opinion, these people should sue the government into oblivion, in my opinion. The government, anybody involved with contacting the social media companies should be fired, barred from government service ever again, because how the hell can they just get away with this, right? Like shutting down voices, right? Some of these people made money from doing this. And then when they were proven to be right, did they get reimbursed? Did they get reinstated? No, of course not. Of course not. And they're still viewed, that impacted their reputations. Some of these doctors, some of these experts that knew exactly what they were talking about, they knew exactly what they were doing, and their reputations and their careers were destroyed because a government bureaucrat decided that, oh, he is wrong because authority tells me that he is wrong. Let me go and shut this voice down. It's absolutely wrong. These people need to be held to account. They need to be fired, like I said, barred from government service ever again. But it goes well beyond that. There is malicious intent behind some of this. Check this out.
You said in an interview that you gave as part of an audiobook written by Michael Spector that you believed an institutional should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated. Could we run the audio clip on that, please?
You think can be done about it? I have to say that I don't see a big solution other than some sort of mandatory vaccination. I know federal officials don't like to use that term.
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you are going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
Thank you. Are all objections to COVID vaccinations ideological bullshit, Dr. Fauci?
No, they're not, and
Thank
that's
you.
not what I was referring to.
Well, in reference to making it hard for people to get education, traveling, working, I'd say it very much was in context. And I take great offense to this.
They lose their ideological bullshit, yeah, and they lose their livelihoods, like I said, their reputations. They lose all kinds of stuff, right? Many people were fired from the military. Many people, nurses, doctors, were fired from their jobs, from their careers, because these people thought that by putting pressure on them to get a vaccine would break them, that they would lose their ideological bullshit, right? Some of this, people actually thought that this went against their religion. I don't care what the hell you think, what reason you have for not wanting to take a vaccine. The government has no say on what you put in your body. Now, and I know a lot of people like to use this for the abortion thing. Well, you know what? I've had this argument with several people. Well, it's my body, my choice with vaccines. And a baby. No, those are two very different things. A experimental vaccine is one thing. Creating life in a baby is a totally different situation there. You can't equate the two. They're unequivocal, if you will. It's a false equivalency. So a lot of people try to use that argument. But getting back to the topic at hand, these people, that to me is malicious intent, that they don't care about your job. They don't care about you. Put pressure on them to force them to take an experimental vaccine that was proven by this point when he made that interview that it's not going to stop transmissibility whatsoever. It's not going to even prevent you from getting the disease. Again, the disease was and still is till this day evolving right along, right? You should talk to your doctor. Don't take any medical advice from me. For God's sakes, don't listen to me at all. I'm just pointing out the facts that they were trying to force this thing upon people without even knowing the end result. It's just wrong, in my opinion, to mandate a vaccine to force people out of their jobs. Once again, I want to stress this point that I'm not giving out medical information, medical advice whatsoever. I am just pointing to the facts around the vaccine mandates and just how wrong it is to try to force people. If you want people to take the vaccine, do more studies on it, right? If it wasn't such an experimental vaccine, if they weren't trying to force it so hardly upon the American people like they were, I think a lot of more people would have been like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and take the vaccine. It only is going to help. I honestly never took the vaccine, didn't want to take the vaccine. It was too experimental. I was worried about side effects, which were founded worries because a lot of people suffered some side effects from this thing, but not a whole lot. Those worries were there. However, the vast majority of people that took the vaccine, they're just fine, and they're moving on with their lives or whatever. So the vaccine in that respect kind of helped, right? If it helped people from getting the disease, if it helped more people than it hurt, in other words, it's a net positive, so it's a good thing. But it's just the fact that they were trying to force it upon us. People lost their jobs, people lost their livelihoods, their reputations were destroyed, they were shunned from society, right? Because we had that big old push for a while, like, oh, people would go crazy if you weren't vaccinated, y'all. Like, get away from me. The people went insane over this. And that, to me, is insane, that the government would put such a force behind this thing that it would cause people to go crazy if they encountered somebody that wasn't vaccinated. For God's sakes, the people would scream at each other if they didn't have a mask on, when the science proved that the masks didn't really help that much. But we're not trying to get off into the woods. I think I've made my point clear on this. The government should never get involved in social media. That's my whole thing, right? They should never get involved in trying to mandate an experimental vaccine that hasn't been tested, hasn't had long-term tests, in other words, that we really didn't know much about. That's all I'm saying. And I think a lot more people in government need to be held to account than what they are, because we haven't seen hardly anybody get fired. We're not holding Fauci to account for lying to the American people, just making up stuff as he goes. I understand it was a pandemic that freaking came out of nowhere, and we haven't had to deal with something like that ever in our lifetimes. The previous pandemic was in the early 1900s, so yeah, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were kind of muddling our way through, but still, that doesn't mean we don't need to hold people to account where there was obvious malicious intent around certain aspects of this thing. And I think Dr. Fauci probably should be prosecuted some sort of a way, sanctioned somehow, some sort of accountability for what he did. But I think I've rambled on for long enough on this one, y'all. I want to thank everybody for watching, and y'all try to have a good day and stay legitical. Peace.